You're listening to Sports Connections with David Smale, the show that brings you a fun and intimate look into connections throughout sports. Now here's your host, David Smale.
Sam Mellinger is the latest in a long line of excellent sports columnists for the Kansas City Star. A native of Lawrence, Kansas, Sam is unique in that he doesn't think any sports story is beneath him. He's covered everything from the Olympics, World Series, Super Bowls, to high school sports. And it's not just that he's worked his way up. He's never forgotten his roots, and he's constantly looking for the great human interest story away from that 30-second lead story on that night's television newscast. His self-deprecating wit and ability to weave his own experiences without making the story about him makes his columns the first thing I read every morning when I open up the electronic version of the Star. So, Sam, welcome to Sports Connections.
Hey, man, that was really cool. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, I mean, you're a good guy, so I got to be nice to you, right? All right, well, let's start with this. Why are the lesser-known stories so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the first thing that hits my mind is actually a criticism I got from somebody. It's actually, do you know Greg Hall? Do you remember Greg Hall?
Yeah, I do.
So Greg
being critical, imagine that.
I got along with Greg. I thought that some of the stuff that he said about me was true, and I had to and I mean it was shortly after I got this job, and he said that I was chasing stories that were too small for the columnist at the Kansas City Star, and he was right, but what he was right about is that if I went out to the Chiefs, I was going to write about Dexter McCluster too often, and not Justin Houston. And I think there's a difference between that and I think what you're referring to, which is I like stories that people haven't heard before.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something to be said about writing what people are talking about. I get that. Lord knows I've written a million Patrick Mahomes columns, right? And we should continue to do that. But I love, part of why, at least that I fell in love with sports, is that you never know.
Yeah.
It's spontaneous. You'll hear a story just watching a game. The fourth guy off the bench in a basketball game might hit the big shot, and there's some great story about him that you don't know. And I think that there's a value in being the person that's able to tell that story. There's a term in our business, I'm sure pack journalism, right?
Yeah.
Where if somebody comes out and they're standing in front of the locker, and there's in normal times, at least, if there's 40 reporters in there, if 39 of them go to that guy, that means there's a whole bunch of athletes in that locker room that don't have anybody to talk to, and you can go get them. And I think that it's just important to be able to tell something different than what people can get everywhere else. I think that if you're just doing everything that everybody else is doing, what's your value?
Yeah. One of them that jumps to mind as you say that, and I didn't prepare this ahead of time. So running back Darwin Thompson just came to me. I believe you were the one that broke the story that the day his high school football coach died, he had a big game for the Chiefs. And a lot of people were writing about a big game, but if I remember correctly, you broke the story that he did it to honor his high school coach. And maybe that wasn't you. Maybe I'm giving you credit where it's not due. But to me, you always have the ability to find the story, find the angle. Yeah, you're writing about the Chiefs. When we first tried to do this, you were, up to your eyeballs in alligators of Chiefs stories. And so it made sense to wait until there was a little bit of downtime. But you've got the ability to find that extra thing. And what my original question was, I read in Mellinger Minutes a lot. Hey, if you've got a story, send it to me, whether it's a high school swimmer or whatever. I appreciate that. Why do you do that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think it was Sam McDowell that wrote the story about Darwin Thompson's old coach that you're referring to. But I think that I didn't think about this until I got this job. And I mean, specifically the sports columnist job, not the other jobs. But I think part of what you're supposed to do is be able to connect with people.
Yeah.
And connect with the community. Like I there's not a lot of us that are just specifically everything is Kansas City. If it matters to Kansas City, I want to write about it. If it doesn't matter to Kansas City, then it can go kick rocks. Like that's kind of how I look at it. And I think that what matters to Kansas City, I mean, the biggest chunk of what matters to Kansas City in terms of sports is Patrick Mahomes, right? Like
Right.
we can all agree on that. We've never had something like that in Kansas City. And
Yeah.
who knows if we ever will again. But I think it also matters to get, a high school basketball team that found out that their state tournament is canceled, right in the middle of a practice, right before the state tournament. I think those are stories that resonate because that's the kid down the block. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's so many, I covered high school sports. That was my first job at the Star. And actually, and I had done it before as well at the Lawrence Journal World and a couple of other places. But anyway, like in some ways, those are like the best stories to cover.
Yeah.
Like they're real, you get access that is just impossible with the Chiefs or even with the Royals, and they're human stories. There's a lot of, I think one of the things I love is, and I'm not the only one, right? But ordinary people doing extraordinary things.
Yeah.
And there's no place that happens more often or in sort of a grander way, I believe, than at the high school level. And that's also something that we can all relate to, right? Like not all, like a lot of us played high school sports, or we have a kid or a neighbor or whatever. There's just something relatable about that. I love doing those stories.
Yeah. And I was just going to make that point that you talked about connecting. You and I didn't play pro sports. There was a good reason why I didn't. I don't know about you, but I couldn't hit a fastball, but to make up for it, I couldn't hit a curveball either. That's why I wasn't a baseball player, and I wasn't big, but I sure was slow. So that's why I didn't play football or basketball. But I did play high school tennis. I was on the golf team that was pretty good. Now I was the guy they never took to the matches, but I was on the golf team. We can relate to those high school athletes in a way, or the rec league athletes in a way that we can't maybe to the pro athletes.
Yeah. And there's something, I don't know. It hits a little bit different when you're able to, whether it's a high school kid whose, mom just went through cancer treatments or something, and now they're at the state tournament, and, the emotion and the realness, the authenticity, I love those stories. And one of the things, I don't know if you've heard this, but there's not as many writers at newspapers now as there used to be.
I have heard that rumor.
And when we used to have 7 people that were just covering high schools. And when we had that, we could kind of canvas 100 and some area high schools and find these stories. And we had them all the time, and they were great. I love doing them. Now we don't really, we just don't have the manpower to do it. It can't, the amount of traffic that generates, it doesn't justify all that stuff. So that's why I say, whether it's on the podcast or in the minutes, like you mentioned, or wherever, Twitter, of just look, man, I'm dependent on parents and high school coaches and people. 'Cause there's, in the last 5 years, there's got to be 500 great high school stories that I just didn't know about. And it's not that realistic for me to be able to find them, because I am sort of chasing Patrick Mahomes and whatever else. But God, when you find the right high school story, like the Scholar Athlete program, that is the coolest thing that the Kansas City Star does. And I've felt that way since the first day I was hired. 20 years ago, which I hate to say out loud, but it is the coolest thing. Those kids are unbelievable. Like the things that these kids are able to juggle and being able to tell those kinds of stories, that's one of my favorite parts of the year as well.
And they were doing that when I worked in the sports department at the Star back in the early 80s. So they've been doing that for a while. We're kind of off track on where I thought we would go, but I do want to mention this. The best sports photo I've ever seen in my life was in the Topeka Capitol back in the mid 80s. And it was a picture of 2 players on opposing teams in the state championship game. I don't remember what division it was or what class it was. I don't remember the teams, but the two players, they were the point guards for the opposing team, and the team that was behind was shooting 2 free throws with like less than a second on the clock. And if they made both, they'd win the state championship. And if they missed both, they'd lose it, or they could go into overtime. And the picture was the two guys, and I don't mean anything political about this, but they were kneeling at the court and they were holding hands. Like, man, isn't this cool that we're a part of this? And they were supporting each other. That is, I wish I could find that. I've searched for years to find that photograph, because that's what sports is about, is,
incredible,
giving it your best and then letting go and just enjoying the moment. So I think that kind of wraps up what we're saying here. And because I was going to ask you if you enjoyed digging for those things. Obviously you do, but it just, there's something about sports that can't be matched in any other field, isn't there?
Yeah. I mean, it's, there's obviously bad parts about sports too, right? I do think that there's a certain, sports can reveal character, good or bad, just as much as they can build character. But I really believe in the positivity of sports. I believe in the power of sports. I believe in it on basically every level. I believe that that a lot of the things, hard work, teamwork, sacrifice, practice, like all these things that if you never, forget about college sports. Like if you never make your high school varsity team, but if you go through these stages on whatever level, whatever sport, and it doesn't matter if it's football or whatever. I just think that those lessons are so valuable. And then on the other side of it, I really believe in the power of the relationships that build around people who are just watching sports. There was a long time ago where I did this story. It must have been around 2005, 2010, somewhere in there, when the Royals were just crap, right?
Yeah, you got to be more specific than that.
Right. But I remember I did this story, I think it was 2010. And so it would have been, it doesn't matter what year it was, but kids that were born after 1985 and had grown into adults and were diehard Royals fans. I just found that like fascinating. These are like 25-year-old, people, like they're adults, like they've got weddings and some of them are divorced and they've got mortgages and they've got kids and they've got, and their entire life, the best highlight they can remember is 2003, the completely fluky team that ended up finishing 3rd or 4th place.
83 and 79, and we celebrated.
Yeah. And I just was like, just tell me why you're a Royals fan. I think I put it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And the responses I got were unbelievable. The one that sticks with me is this woman who said, that she didn't have a great relationship with her dad. Her dad was just kind of not the dad that we all hope to be or whatever. But even through the bad times, that was the one thing they could talk about was the Royals. And, they sucked, they could talk about how they lost 10-1 or whatever the night before, but it was something that we could talk about. And I think that there's a million people, literally more than a million people in the United States that can have like similar stories, whether it's the Royals or the Chiefs or the Sonics, back in the day, or the Bulls or the Knicks or whatever. And I think that it binds us. You know what I mean? My best friends in the world, a lot of our best memories are around sports, either playing or watching. I mean, it just, the power of these games. I mean, we make it way more important than we should.
Absolutely.
Teachers should be making more and athletes should be making less, but there's a dark side, but that power, I truly believe in it. It's why this is the only job I've ever wanted. What I mean?
One of the things that I like, one of the reasons I like reading your stuff is you have a good blend of humor, and you don't try to be funny. It just comes through. Where does that humor come from?
Oh, you're nice. I think probably there's two things that come to mind. First is my friends. Like I have my group of friends, high school friends, college friends, post-college friends, like we all just make fun of each other. and they're different groups, but I've obviously like gravitated to these people for a reason.
Yeah.
And we joke all the time. And, these text threads are just, trying to make each other laugh. And, that's probably a lot of it. And my wife is really funny. I think that's one of the many, many things that I love about her. And she actually, so we have a kind of a weird story, me and my wife, but we reconnected almost exactly at the time that I got this job. And so she lived in Chicago at the time. And so we weren't around each other all the time, but she read, the stuff that I was doing. And she likes sports, like she likes baseball more than football, whatever. Anyway, and she was reading it, and I can't remember how this came up, but she was like, "You got to have more fun." You know what I mean? Like, you've got to, like, when I read your stuff, she's like, "I'm sure, the arguments make sense and the numbers and all that stuff, but it doesn't read like you." And she's like, "Sports are supposed to be fun." And she was absolutely right. And it was, and the reason, like, I didn't feel up to this job, just to be like as blatantly honest with you.
I remember you saying that though.
Yeah, as I can be. I was, I don't even know if I was 30 years old when I got this job. And it was just, I just, the poor readers from the Kansas City Star went from having Jason and Joe and then just me, like within a span of like 2 months. And I felt completely overwhelmed and overmatched, and I couldn't lighten up. And for some reason, when my wife said that, it clicked with me of just, you know what, like, just be yourself. And if it sucks, then the job's not for you, and you can go, you can stop torturing yourself, in a real job.
That's great advice, though. Is you gotta be you. And one of the things I appreciate is you're not trying, like I said earlier, you're not trying to be funny. If you're a funny guy, the humor comes through. Poznansky is a riot, and I've had him on my podcast, and we've talked about some of his columns that I called my brother, and he's laughing when he answered the phone. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm reading Poznansky." I said, "That's why I called you, because some of his columns of stories with his brother." But your humor is more subtle, but it just blends in, and it's not forced at all. So I do like that about it.
That's nice of you. That's what I try to. I mean, yeah, I'm not just doing one-liners. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I actually literally used to have. My mom got me this little notebook, and I would read lines from, just reading, not for work necessarily, but just reading. And if there's something that made me laugh or think or whatever, I'd write it down and think in my stupid brain, maybe I can apply that at some point. Maybe I can use that at some point. I'm like, that's still not me. I'm not, and I'm not trying to do one-liners here, but you just, you gotta, it's the most easier said than done thing in the world. But I do think you just got to be yourself. Cause like, if I'm trying to be somebody better than me, I'm going to be a bad version of that. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
If I'm the best me I can be, then at least it's authentic.
There you go. One of the things that's interesting about being yourself, I think you do a good job of keeping your bias out of your stories. I know you grew up in Lawrence, you graduated from Kansas, but you are not afraid to be critical of Bill Self if he deserves it. You're not afraid to be critical of Andy Reid or Dayton Moore. Is that hard for you? Or once you realize, hey, I've just got to be myself, and if there's something to criticize, you criticize it?
I mean, like, I like to laugh and write about happy things more than get angry. You know what I mean? But I think that, and I'm not the first person to say this either, but if you can be critical, as long, but you can say this person did a stupid thing, but once you say this person is stupid, there's a huge difference in that. And if you can say, and these guys screw up, they're human beings, right? Like, and I think if as long as you approach it with, hey, like, I might not agree with, you mentioned Andy Reid, I might not agree with some fourth down call or whatever, and he may be wrong, but you still, as long as you approach he's wrong with the idea that he has more information than I do, right? Because he lives this and practice and all these things. And if you don't get personal, if you can back it up, if you show up and take it, There's people, this has happened a few different times with a few different people where, and this is when I know we have a great relationship is if I can write something and the person that I'm either writing about or is involved in what I'm writing about calls me and tells me a lot of names that, they wouldn't say in front of their mom. Right. And then at some point it'll just be, all right, you need anything? Are we good? And there's a professionalism. You can be, like this analogy is not perfect at all, but I get furious with my kids sometimes, but I love them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that, there's a difference between just being, can I say a-hole? Just being just being a jerk. There's a difference between that and
that's probably better. Yeah.
Yeah. And being like just critical because it's real. Because again, we're just talking about being yourself. Not everything's positive. So, you can't go that route either.
We talked about the fact that this is, and maybe it was before we started recording, but that this is the strangest year in terms of covering sports. I mean, it is worldwide anyway, but in terms of covering sports, it's the strangest year. What's been the hardest part of this last 12 months now?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two things that stick out, and I don't know if this is what people would think about or not, but excuse me. The first is building relationships. Like that is such a huge chunk of what you and I try to do, right? Like, it's just hard. You can't bump into people, in the clubhouse or in the little tunnel between the clubhouse and the dugout. It just, you don't see people at training camp, in the same way. You can't go watch like a college basketball practice and start talking to a assistant coach or whatever. And that's where so many stories, just like a story that you would not have thought about, that's where you get that.
Yeah.
And B, you also get like a different perspective on a story that you're already thinking about, intentionally or not. And that's hard to make up for. It really is. You end up leaning, and I'm luckier than most in this situation, right? Because I've been here a long time and I've got enough relationships to, that it can be a text message or a call or whatever. But I'm not building
right
new relationships, and that sucks. And then you feel like a little bit disconnected, I went to the Super Bowl and maybe 5 other Chiefs games, but for the most of them, you're watching at home.
Yeah.
And that's hard. You feel kind of disconnected from it. And which the biggest struggle that all I want with this job is to be worth people's time. When somebody clicks something with my name on the top, like by the time they're done with it, I desperately want them to think that was worth their time. If it is, they're going to come back, and we'd start to develop a little bit of a relationship, a connection there, a credibility. And if I'm not worth their time, then they're going to remember that the next time they see something from me. And it is, and this isn't something with, we all of us in this weird business are dealing with it, but it's harder to be good. You know what I mean? It's just hard to feel like you're, like I think about, this is such a small, dumb thing that maybe only I think about, but there was after a Chiefs playoff loss, I forget which one, it was before Mahomes. And Travis Kelce was really upset. He was really upset. And he was upset with some calls, and he was also upset with his coaches. And you could tell that being in the locker room. You just could. You just read it on people. And when he got up to speak in front of his locker, Charkandrick West stood up, got on top of a chair in front of his own locker, and got into Travis's line of vision. And he starts doing this. He starts pointing at his head, like, think, do not say something stupid. I saw that. It was all I needed to know about this whole thing.
Yeah.
And you can't get that. That doesn't exist now. It's all in the Zooms, and it's a little bit corporate, and it's straight laced and all that. It's just, it's just a lot different. So that's hard, but like we're on the same boat, so we got to push forward, right?
Yeah. I'm going to throw one other thing that's been hard for you, and it's not just this year, but it's been 4 years. Your name is Sam Mellinger, and the quarterback at Texas is Sam Ellinger. And it's exactly the same, except his parents forgot the first letter of his last name. And it would have been nice if they named him Frank or Joe. That doesn't end in the same with the M.
Yeah.
How hard has it been for you not to call him Sam Mellinger in your columns, or if you're doing the audio thing that you guys do?
Yeah, I've come to believe, like, I want that guy to either quit football or to be like the best player ever. Like, I just like, and I don't know exactly which. There was a Big 12 media day, and if he started as a freshman, I don't.
I think he did partway through. I don't think he started his first game, but pretty quickly, yeah.
Then it must have been the media day before his freshman year, and I stood up. You get the microphone.
Yeah.
And,
you can see where this is going.
Yeah, Tom Herman was the coach at the time, or whoever it was, and I just stood up and I was like, I forgot the story I was doing, but I stood up, grabbed the microphone, I was, hey, Sam Mellinger, Kansas City Star, and as soon as I said that, like the whole room of reporters just like turned around, and I was like, that's weird, why? Because I'd never heard of Sam Ellinger before that. The other thing about that, Texas had a lineman at some point. I don't know, pardon me, I don't know how he pronounced his last name, but he spelled it Vahe, Vahe.
Uh-huh.
And so there was a picture of like Sam Ellinger and Vahe like blocking for him that some people sent to me and Vahe. That's kind of funny. But yeah, I could have. You're right. I could have used him being Joe. Even a Joe would have been like there would have been some inconvenience. But
yeah,
Sam is a low blow.
One of my best friends is a guy named Neil Smith, and he was writing back in the late 90s, I guess it was, mid 90s. He was writing a red eye from San Francisco to Kansas City, and he's in first class and in row by himself. And there's like 4 other people on the whole plane. And this guy sits down next to him in the middle seat. I mean, the plane is practically empty. Guy sits down to him and he just kind of looks over at him like, are you serious? Yeah. And the guy says, yeah, trying to figure out who I am, huh? And he said, no, not really. He goes, well, I'm Duron Cherry. And he goes, oh, okay. He said, I thought you looked familiar. He said, I'm Neil Smith. And he goes, no, I'm really Duron Cherry. And he goes, and I'm really Neil Smith. And so his wife sits down then and he says, honey, get out my football card, show him. And he holds it up next to his face and I'm really Duron Cherry. And my friend gets out his driver's license and says, and I'm really Neil Smith. And awesome. So, I understand what you're going through with that. I had to bring that up. I thought that was one of the funniest things that you've had to deal with. Let's switch gears. You and I talked about this a couple of months ago when college basketball really started gaining traction, the difficulties experienced by the Blue Bloods. And obviously this is going to be out after the tournament. We're recording it in early March, but I think we can, even if somebody gets hot, even if Duke wins the ACC tournament, makes the tournament and goes to the Final Four, we can still say this has been a bad year for the Blue Bloods. Why do you think that is? When we first talked about this, I thought it had something to do with the lack of crowds at home games not affecting the officials. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but I said, I think probably the disparity between the home calls and the road calls would be less. Do you think there's validity in that?
I do. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that, you don't get those home court advantages there's a little chicken and egg thing going on, right? Like you don't get those crowds and that noise and, the overwhelming of the officials. You don't get that unless you're really good.
Right.
So there is, but I mean, there's no question. I know this can be like a sore spot with some KU fans, but I mean, there's no question they won games that they had no business winning because the games were at Allen Fieldhouse. And, the first one that comes to my mind is the West Virginia. Remember that? I mean, it's probably been 5, 6, 7 years by now, but, down a ridiculous amount with a ridiculously small amount of time, and they ended up winning the game. And they deserved to win the game, but like it's if that's on a neutral floor, they're taking the L.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's that game that you're talking about, but 2018, I think it was, when KU played K-State in the semis, and West Virginia had already won, so they were going to advance. They were going to be the take on the winner, and it was at Sprint Center, and the officiating. And I'm a K-Stater. I'm not. I know I look through purple colored glasses, but the officiating was just totally uneven. I'm sitting on press row next to Bob Huggins, and I've known Bob since he was at K-State for a year, and so without really thinking, knowing he was scouting, I didn't take that into consideration. I said, well, Coach, I hope you're ready to play 5-on-8 tomorrow night. And I thought he would just give me a Huggins look and go on. He went on for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
He goes, yeah, the game at Allen Fieldhouse this year. And he just goes on and on. He goes, I sent tapes to the league office. I never heard anything about it. And he's going on. And finally, my recorder was between us, on the table between us. And I reached over, picked it up. I said, good thing this thing isn't on. And he goes, oh, shucky derns. You're right.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I've talked to John Higgins about this. He said they get the calls because they're usually in better position. They're better players. They're able to avoid the contact if it could be offensive. So I think there's truth to that, but referees are human beings, and they're going to get caught up in the crowd, I think.
There's something to be said for, better athletes, and, that energy from the crowd affects the home team differently than it does most road teams. I mean, there's exceptions, like Kevin Durant is the one that always comes to mind,
Yeah.
Baylor, Scott Drew, I don't know if he still does this, but he used to take the team off the court, during that ridiculous pregame hype video.
Yeah.
Kevin Durant just stood there and watched the whole thing, ignoring his coach, and then dropped 25 in the first half. Some people are different. They can just, they can deal with it. So there is some, what you said, John said, but there's also, you ever read there's this book, Scorecasting. It's a few years old by now. It was a really interesting, it's super nerdy sports book, but so I loved it. There was this entire chapter on, I thought it was the most interesting chapter of a really good book. And it was about home field, home court, home ice, whatever advantage. And they looked at all different sports on different continents, everything. And they determined that, college basketball fans doing this thing behind that has no effect.
Yeah.
All these things, the travel, whatever, chartered flights versus whatever, it just has very little or no effect. But it was calls, it was fouls, it was, and like you said, like humans or referees are human, and it's hard, and they're different than the rest of us. Those referees, they're able to tick off 20,000 people, but if they think twice about ticking 20,000 people off, if they think twice once out of 10 times, make a big difference. And I think we've seen that in the NFL where the home field advantage has really shrunk with replay. I think that stuff matters. So yeah, I mean, going back to the blue bloods, it's not, I don't think you can isolate all of each one of those programs' struggles to home court advantage, but I do think that it's a big deal. I mean, like most obvious is Kansas. I know they're playing really well right now as we're recording, but they don't have the talent that I think they would probably have if they didn't have the investigation hanging over them. You know what I mean? So there's other stuff too, but I don't think there's any question that the lack of fans hurts those programs for sure.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit. Entertainers have to have big egos to be willing to expose their talents for all the world to see. And I think writers qualify as entertainers. You have to have the ability to be the expert and yet be humble about it. To me, and I'm not just trying to throw stuff at you to make you feel good, but to me, you have a good grasp of your own ego. You call your most popular column, I guess it's your most popular column, it's my favorite, the Mellinger Minutes, you call it a time suck. how do you find that delicate balance to make fun of yourself, but to be confident in what you're doing? Because you're a good writer.
I mean, I take, I don't know. I guess I've always tried to take what I do seriously. I'm never gonna miss an assignment. I'm never gonna mail it in. I'm gonna, like I do, like I'm diligent. I'll work my ass off. Like those things are real. But I don't take myself seriously. I just don't. And there's times where Kate, my wife, says like sometimes she thinks that like I should take myself more seriously, and she has the same issue. Like, we're very similar people, but I look like I don't feel like one of my neighbors is a physical therapist. Another one of my neighbors is a first grade teacher. Another one of my neighbors is a pediatric optometrist. Another one of my neighbors is an ER doctor. One of my best friends is a high school coach. These people, all of these people do have jobs that are much more fundamentally important to society than what I do. So I find it hilarious when sports media people have these giant egos that they can't get themselves around. I think that's hilarious, because you're talking about sports, and you should do the work seriously. You should take that seriously. But I think that, like, in the grand scheme, like, this is one of the things where how my mind works. Like, when the aliens come and we have to explain ourselves, like, I don't know how we're going to explain a sports media person who has a big ego while a teacher is doing the work that teachers do, which is absolutely the work of heroes, and is not paid well, and all these things. I mean, there's just there's a perspective on that, and also, like, I mean, my first job, it wasn't even a job because they didn't pay me. My first job was like I went to the local paper, the Lawrence Journal World, where I grew up, and just worked for free doing whatever nobody else wanted to do. And I know that, like, free internships thing, that's a thing now that people don't want to do, but like I was thrilled to do it. And that was the lower than the bottom job that's offered. And so I think that there's something to be said, like, when that's your background.
Yeah.
Then, that's still how I think of myself. I'm not, like, I don't think that it is a time suck, man. That thing is like 5,000 or 6,000 words. Like, I can't believe that people click through that thing. So, I'm just trying to be real.
And I read every word of it. It might take me a few hours because I'm going from, I've got to write this, or I've got to cover this, or I've got to do this interview, or I've got this phone call, or whatever, but I always get through to them. By the way, did you find anybody to take you up on the $50 to read the phone book? That was one of your things with wanting to get back in person. Because I'm still available if you haven't. So
yeah, I think about, like, like I'm down here as we're doing this in Arizona, and the crowds are limited and all of that. And I know we had football games with fans, but it is so cool to see, like, I mean, I just, like, after the last year, to be able to watch a baseball game with humans, like, clapping and eating hot dogs, and like, what it's that was a tangent. I don't know why I mentioned that, but
that's fine.
It makes me so happy. It just makes me so happy. I can't believe it.
I'm guessing, and we've been friends for a while. I don't know you really, really well, but I know you pretty well. I'm guessing the story you wrote, and maybe it was the part of just the lead to Minutes Today, about, and I'm going to mess up his name, Ciuli Mateus, yeah. Mateus, that home run. You talked about just the sheer joy of watching baseball in person again. Do you have a favorite story that you've written in 20 years?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, look, I've come to think of it this way, that I could live to be 200 years old and do this job the rest of my life, and I don't know that I'll ever have more fun than I had with the 2014 and 15 Royals. That was unbelievable to me, the way that Kansas City responded, the genuine connection that was built between that group of players and the fans. I mean, there was just, I literally, I don't know that I'll ever, like, experience anything like that. the other one that comes to mind, and this is, you use the word favorite, and this is, I don't know that that's the right word here necessarily, but there was a player that Michael Keck, who played. He was a terrific
From Harrisonville?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
played
he
at
was
Mizzou?
Yep, high school football player, and then went to Mizzou. Wasn't for him, and he transferred, and just kind of never had the football career that. I mean, he was like a top 50 if I remember right, certainly top 100 recruit, and I got to know Michael a little bit. He was raised by his grandma primarily, who was an incredible woman, and I got to know his high school coach, and I was covering high schools at the time. And anyway, he died at the age of 25, and I saw that, and it hit, like somebody, it's going to hit you, and I kept thinking about it, and about a year later or so, I was just curious about it. I just wanted to hear what happened. And his wife, I ended up getting to know, and we talked, and she really trusted me, and opened up about some things. And I was, you see why I'm saying favorite's the wrong word.
Yeah.
But I was proud of being able to help her tell Michael's story. And it had a dual purpose. One was, this was when CTE was emerging and people weren't understanding it. And at the time, oh my gosh, is it Ann McKee? Is that the woman's, the doctor in Boston, who was on the kind of the leading edge of all this research? And at the time she had said that they had never come close to seeing this much CTE in a brain this young. So that was part of it. And the other part of it was that Michael's wife was trying to put together, they had a little son who I think was 3 or 4 at the time. I might be wrong about that, but she was trying to put together some things for him to be able to remember, or to learn, not remember, but learn about his dad when he got older. And so it was kind of a dual purpose. And I was pleased with the end product, and proud that I was able to, be the messenger, right? It's not my story, it's their story, but you're able to be the messenger there.
Okay, I'm going to ask you another tough one along that same line. I've been to 7 Final Fours. I've been to 3 BCS championships, 6 College World Series, 2 Super Bowls, 2 World Series, 2 Major League Baseball All-Star games. To me, the best part of being a journalist is that I get into games for free.
Yeah.
Games I would go to anyway, even if I didn't get paid. What's the best part of the job for you?
Everything. I was a weird kid. This is the only thing I wanted to do since I was 10 or 12 years old. And I never deviated. And I know that's weird. But the stuff that I wanted to get in this business for, getting into games for free, all that stuff has lived up to it. There's not a part of the job that I thought I'd like that I ended up not liking.
Yeah.
But what I never considered, and honestly, I never thought that much about it until I got the job I have now. I didn't think this much about when I was doing high schools or baseball or anything else. But I think one of the most rewarding part is connections with readers. It really is, man. And the connections with sources, and that stuff's cool too. Getting to know, there's a lot of interesting people that make their living in sports, athletes, coaches, scouts, business people, whatever. It's an interesting group of people, and I love that. But the way that that these connections have built over time with readers is I honestly I'm kind of I can be a corny, emotional person. I get that, but outside of my family and my closest friends, it is one of the things that I cherish the most in my life. Is these people that I've sort of. There's a lot of them I feel I know, and I've probably never met most of them in person. It's that part of it I never considered until I got this specific job. But it's amazing. It's my favorite part of the job now.
I want you to talk about the history of the sports department at the Star. for a mid-market daily newspaper, there have been some phenomenal writers passing through there. When I was there, we had Mike McKenzie and Jonathan Rand. We had Gib Twyman. Through the years, we've had Dennis Dodd and Tom Chattel and Steve Richardson and of course, I don't know if Bill Richardson was still around when you were there. There have been some amazing writers. You talked about Joe Posnanski and Jason Whitlock. Do you feel honored to be a part of that tradition?
My God, yeah. I mean, that was why I was like spooked for the first 6 or 12 months that I had. I never thought. I thought that I would be a college beat writer. Honestly, I was, for whatever reason, I thought that that's what I would end up doing. And maybe later on you go cover a team for a national site or whatever. But I never pictured myself in this job. When you get hired, and the sports columnists are Joe and Jason, those jobs are taken.
Yeah, for sure.
You're not beating them out. So, it's what you're talking about is something I think about a lot. The Tracy Ringlesby is another, Wright Thompson, Jeff Passan, Liz Merrill. Liz Merrill is one of the best writers in the country.
Michelle Vopel.
Yeah, Michelle, Andy McCullough, Perez. There's just Jason Key. There's a million of them, and it's been incredible. All the way up to the people that I work with now, and the ones I work with most closely. It's Herbie, it's Blair, it's Sam McDowell, it's Vahe. I mean, these are some of my favorite people in the world.
Yeah.
It's been a long line of good people to work with. It is a proud tradition. I think that we take a lot of pride in it. I feel differently. Look, I feel differently working for the Star than I would anywhere else, because I grew up going to games in Kansas City and spent, a lot of time, all that. But if I grew up in Minneapolis or Seattle or whatever, I would feel differently working at the Star than I would a lot of other places, just because of the people that you mentioned. Absolutely.
And you forgot to mention the Agate clerk, the guy who put together the Agate page in 1984, who was just head and shoulders.
He's a legend.
His ego was the only thing that exceeded his talent. So anyway, we'll leave that guy unmentioned. How do you get better at your craft? Because obviously you're very good and you're accomplished, and now you're very well respected. How do you get better?
Effort. You just have to keep trying. I don't think I've ever, and this is just my personality anyway, but I'll never feel like I have this thing whipped. You know what I mean? And so I don't feel like I can, I don't feel like, and look, I hate false humility. This is not false humility.
Right.
I'm not good enough to just mail it in and keep my job or keep the credibility or whatever. I feel like I have to keep working. And that's, the one thing that I got this piece of advice when I was in college, and it's actually a guy that I should have mentioned in the previous answer, was Mike Vaccaro. When I was in college, Vac was at the Star, and of all the people, I bugged so many people at that time in my life who were doing the job that I wanted to do. And it was just basically how did you become you? And Vac was the most helpful of everyone. And there were a lot of people but Vac was my guy. And he gave me this, he said, make it a manageable number, but somewhere between 3 and 7 or so writers that you like, and find everything that they've done and read as much as you can about them. And, that list has changed over the time, but, and he said, read it twice. Read it the first time the way it's intended, just as a sports fan or whatever. The second time, read it as a student, and think about the decisions that writer made. Think about, how did they come up with this idea? Is that something you could have come up with? Why did they choose this lead? What would you have done differently? What did you like? What did you not like? All these things, you put it together, and you eventually, you're not plagiarizing. I'm not, but you sort of put it in a blender, and then you add yourself, and eventually you get sort of you, and you keep going. And I think that I feel like by now I have, I'm comfortable in a writing voice that I have. So I'm not necessarily doing that, but now that I'm still reading probably more than I ever did before. But it's more of what Vac was saying the second time through of being a student. And, there's so many great, Mike Rosenberg. There's so many writers who I want to learn a lot from. And I think that's the biggest thing. And a lot of my friends, I've got a lot of friends in this business, and I ask them a lot of questions and get inspiration from them. I think that's the biggest way that I try to get better.
Here's the advice that I got when I was working. Actually, my first newspaper job was Newsday. So I went from Newsday to the Star to the Manhattan Mercury. Most people work the other direction, but I was a part-timer at Newsday, and I wanted to write for them because I was just doing high school sports. And I wrote a story, and one of the editors that nobody liked called me over, and he said, you suck, don't you? And I said, well, thanks for the vote of confidence. But he said, do you want to get better? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, let me give you one piece of advice, and then we'll meet for a few weeks and we'll work on this. And his first piece of advice I have never forgotten. And if I ever am in a game, covering a game especially, or even a feature story, I will never forget this. He said, imagine you're at an event, you're covering a game, you're writing about something, and your best friend isn't there. What would you tell him first?
Yeah.
Well, there's your lead. And then what would you tell him? And then what would you tell him? And the stuff that might get chopped off at the end because there's not enough space for your story, that's the stuff that you put in there. But if it doesn't get in, that's not important. There are so many times when I'm sitting there and it's like, I'm covering an MLS game and it's 0-0 going into the 80th minute, and I've got to write a certain number of words. And it's like, what do I write about? Well, actually, I'll think about 2 or 3 different people who I know are big sports fans, and I'll start writing. That was 39 years ago, Sam, that guy told me. I wish I knew where that guy was, because I would write it. I'd call him up and I'd say, I've written 22 books. I've written thousands of articles because of the advice you gave me. And he thought he was just trying to get me to shut up. But it's great advice. It's great advice. Well, I want to wrap up. You've given us a great amount of time here.
Oh, don't worry.
People in Kansas City, especially readers of the Star, feel like they know your family because you do such a good job of blending them into the story. So what makes you the proudest about them? And then just talk about your wife and kids. Are your boys future journalists, or like the rest of us, do they plan to be professional athletes?
Yeah, look, man, I might start crying if I talk too much.
That's okay. We can edit.
Yeah. My wife is, she's the love of my life. We, I guess I mentioned earlier, we have kind of a weird story. We met in 7th grade, and we dated pretty much, off and on. We were teenagers, right? But pretty much off and like through high school. And she went to Michigan State. I went to Kansas, and we were always in touch, and we were always like very good friends, and we would see each other and all these things. And then she lived in Chicago after college, and I obviously moved here to Kansas City. Things happen. I got married, and it was very short. It was like a year. And that was the only time that me and Katie hadn't talked. And so when I got divorced, then it was, me and Katie reconnected quickly after that. And I think I knew that, the other thing was a mistake, and it was, I don't know if it's a decision I ever could have made on my own, but I'm glad that it was made. And, she is solid. She has the best, judge of character, that I've ever known. She's funny. She's the kind, like she's the best friend, that somebody could have. I'm just, incredibly lucky, to have her in my life. And, our kids, I would talk to you for hours about our kids. Sammy just turned 7. He's in 1st grade. He turned 7 just a few days ago, actually on Saturday. And he's obsessed with sports. He thinks more than anybody that I've ever known in my life. Like his brain is just constantly moving. He thinks about everything. He's really smart. He's got a very nerdy side and a very jock side, which I love. It's a great combination. He's a really good big brother. He's protective of his little brother, JB, who will be 5 in about a month. He'll be 5 on April 7th. So I don't know if that's probably around the time this will come out. And JB is I mean, he makes me laugh more than anybody in the world. He's really smart, but he's kind of a wild guy. He's sensitive. He can make a game out of anything. I mean, they're a blast, man. Like I love. I mean, it's, you know, people say enjoy every second, you know, because it's over faster than you think, and I know that. And I literally, like, I just want to enjoy every little second. And I try, but know it's still going to be, I mean, I can't believe they're 7 and almost 5, you know, that, you know, I feel like these are the years that I want to remember everything. They're just, I mean, you know, everybody that has a family probably feels the same way, but they're the best, man.
Well, and we talked earlier about how difficult this past year has been. And you've written in some of your columns about the good side of that is that you've really connected with your boys, especially. You've got to watch them learn. You got to watch them become more sports fans, where maybe if they've been in school and you'd have missed some of that stuff, that's definitely a benefit to what's happened. I've got 2 granddaughters who are 5 and 3, and I understand that completely. So last thing for you. Well, okay, I lied. There's 2 more questions. It seems like everyone's writing a book. Is that in your future, and what would it be about?
Yeah, I don't know. I've helped 2 people with books. Art Stewart was my favorite. Art is one of my favorite people in the world. And I enjoyed both processes, but I did, you know, I kind of told myself that if I write another book, it'll be more my story. I don't mean like the story of me. I don't mean, you know, like, and I don't know what I've had a few ideas here and there. I'd love to do one, but I mean, you know how it is. Like it's, I mean, you know how it is 22 times, right? It's a huge undertaking, and I want to make sure that I have the right idea and the right motivation. You know, so in the meantime, I'm totally cool spending my free time with our kids and my wife. But I would love to do one. I really would. I guess I'm just waiting for the right, you know, me and Andy McCullough, we started a book, on the 2015 Royals. And, it just kind of, he took the job at with the LA Times, and it became complicated after that. So that's the closest I've come in the last, I guess, 6 years.
I'll tell you what, sometimes those opportunities happen and you're full speed ahead before you know it. I'll give you 2 examples from me. My first one, I was in graduate school at K-State, and I was sitting in a class, sitting next to Kenny Mossman, who at the time was the sports information director. He's now the associate AD at Oklahoma. And they were getting ready to close Ahern Fieldhouse in 1988. And I said, what are you going to do to commemorate? He said, well, we're going to sell T-shirts. And I said, well, you need to do something more permanent. He said, what? And I said, well, you know, produce a book about the history of Ahern. He goes, okay, why don't you do it? And I said, I've never written a book. He said, you've written stories. It'll be a series of stories. Come to my office tomorrow. So I went to his office the next morning, and we chatted for a couple of minutes, and he picks up the phone, calls Lon Kruger. Lon, there's somebody I want you to meet. Okay, we'll be right down. So we walk into Lon's office. We're there 2 minutes, and he says, hey, Lon, I know you're busy. I want to introduce you to my friend David. He has the idea. He has the idea of writing a book on the history of Ahern Fieldhouse. Lon goes, I think it's a great idea. Is he the one to do it? He goes, yeah, he's a good writer. He goes, all right, hang on. He picks up the phone. He calls the AD, Steve Miller. And he says, Steve, there's somebody I want you to meet. We walk down the hall to Steve's office. We walk in. He goes, what's up? He goes, this is Kenny's friend David, and he wants to do a book on the history of Ahern Fieldhouse. Steve goes, well, do you want him to do it? He goes, yeah, I think so. He goes, all right, done. That was our negotiation, and we did it. And then the Chiefs book that I did this spring, I'm literally walking into the Big 12 tournament on Wednesday night, and Al Wallace calls me and he says, hey, do you mind if I give your contact information to a publishing company that wants help with a book on the Chiefs? I was like, Al, you don't need my permission to do that. Yeah, go ahead. And I figured they'd call over the next few days. And that night, I'm sitting courtside covering the K-State TCU game, and my phone is just blowing up. Like, you sat courtside at the Big 12 tournament. You know you can't hear your phone. And so I just let it go to voicemail. And that night, I get back into the media room, and I listen to the message. The guy says, call me at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I have a meeting at 8:30. I want to talk about this book. Well, I don't know, I'm an empty nester, so I don't have to worry about getting up to help get the kids ready for school. I'm not a morning person, especially if I'm working till midnight. But I thought I could make an exception for this, because I remember the Chiefs coming here in 1963. I was 5 years old. And so I called them, and they tell me that this is a series of short features on the people and the events that shaped the history. I said, that sounds like fun. I'll do it. I said, good. Deadline's June 15. I said, that's 3 months. They said, well, we can find someone else. And I was afraid they were serious. And I said, no, I didn't say I wouldn't do it. That's just really fast. So if I get it to you by June 15, you'll have it out by the start of the season. They said, no, it'll be out at the end of October. And after questioning their sanity about releasing a football book at the end of October, I said, when do you need the manuscript to have it by the start of the season? And they said, that's impossible. I said, let me rephrase. When do you need the manuscript to have it out by the start of the season? And they said, April 15. And I said, okay. I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. I said, okay, I'll do it. Well, I went back to the Big 12 tournament later that morning, and everything shut down. I wrote the whole book on the Chiefs in 2 weeks. Good because grief. I didn't have anything else to do. There was nothing to cover, and I didn't have a job. I'm strictly freelance. So I wrote that thing in 2 weeks.
My God. If
I come up with an idea for a book for you, I will give you maybe 3 or even 4 weeks to get it done. How about that?
That's crazy, man.
All right. Well, let me wrap up with this. I didn't intend to get that much on me, but because this is about my guest, but I'd always like to wrap up with this question. You're a long way from retiring, but when you retire, what do you hope your legacy is?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm glad that you prefaced that with you're a long way from retiring.
Yeah, my son is almost your age, so I can say that.
Trying to push me out here. You know what? I don't know. I've never thought about I don't know. I don't. Legacy seems like a word for people that do bigger things, but I hope I hope people think of me. That's how I'll say it. I hope people think of me as a good husband and a good dad first, but as far as like professional, I hope that people think of me as someone who loves his job and feels privileged, honored to be able to do this, and worked hard to help people enjoy their teams, good and bad. If that's how people remember me, I'd be absolutely thrilled.
All right. Well, it's always good to catch up with you, Sam. I'm looking forward to sitting, watching live baseball, hearing the fans out at the stadium this summer, or maybe at Sporting Park, or I guess Children's Mercy Park now, or somewhere. But it's always good to catch up with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for listening to Sports Connections with David Smale. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and rate the show from your favorite podcast platform. You can learn more about David Smale and his work by visiting davidsmalebooks.com. Don't forget to join us weekly for new episodes. Until next time.